Hello, ni hao, ni hao. Welcome to the latest edition of the Silk Road Movie Podcast, a weekly podcast bringing the very best in Chinese film to British and international audiences. My name is James, and I'll be taking you on this journey along the cinematic Silk Road, traveling between China and the West through films ranging from the classics of the past through to new modern stories and the films of the future. The podcast goes out weekly on Thursdays, and you can subscribe to us on all the usual major podcast platforms like iTunes, Spotify, Google, and more. And you can also find us on Facebook, Twitter, and other social media channels under Silk Road Movie Podcast. We're also going out over in China too, and I really hope we're bringing film fans from the East and the West together. Thank you very much for joining us for this new episode of the Silk Road Movie Podcast. And this is going to be another in our ongoing series of episodes which focuses on a female Chinese filmmaker. In other episodes we've covered Yang Lina and her film Spring Tide, and Kathy Yen and Dead Pigs, and this is something we're going to be coming back to more and more in the future. In this episode though, we're going to be looking at director Bai Xue and her debut film The Crossing. And The Crossing is basically about a 16-year-old girl who's smuggling mobile phones between Shenzhen and Hong Kong. It's played festivals around the world, and it's won a lot of awards, which is very impressive for a young filmmaker writing and directing her first film. I'm very excited that we've managed to get an exclusive interview with Bai Xue, and she's very kindly responded to questions about the film and about her own career. And don't worry, we'll be hearing from her very soon. Okay, so before we get to the interview, let's talk a little bit about The Crossing itself, just to give a bit of context. As for Bai Xue herself, when she was 6, she went to live in Shenzhen with her parents, and then at 18 she went to Beijing Film Academy, where she graduated. She made a number of shorts before she started working on The Crossing, though, as we'll talk about in a while, The Crossing it took quite a long time to actually get made, over a decade, I believe, but we'll get into the details of that. In terms of the plot, the film stars a new actress called Huang Yao, who plays the 16-year-old Peipei, she's quite a shy girl, it seems, at the start of the film, and she's what's referred to as a Shenzhen Danfei. And apparently this is a term which is used to describe a child who's born of like a Hong Kong-China marriage. And the film opens with her trying to make enough money to go for a spa holiday in Japan with her much richer best friend Joe, who's played by Carmen Soup. Peipei's father works nights at a shipping yard, though unfortunately her mother spends all the family money at late night mahjong parties. Peipei spends her days commuting between Shenzhen and Hong Kong where she goes to school, and to make money while doing this she starts smuggling for a gang. This begins all pretty low-key, and she's basically like taking a couple of phones in her school bag. And because it's only 2 phones, if she gets stopped at the border, then, she can claim they're just for personal use. But she starts falling in with like a gang boss called Sister Hua, who's played by Elena Kong. And she starts pushing Peipei to carry more high-level contraband, more valuable items. But although you start to maybe think that the film is going to go in a direction of being, about like Peipei being set up, getting into deep, getting involved in some kind of heist or, running into more trouble. Instead, the film kind of goes a different route, and it starts focusing a lot more on her own personal journey and her development. And her relationships with the other characters, in particular a young street kid called Hao, who's played by Sunny Sun Yan, and who's also Joe's boyfriend. So you start to get a much more complicated character drama, and the film does play out a lot differently to what you might expect.
Non-school. Good. No school.
我希望香港落雪。拜拜。
So the Chinese title of the film is Guo Chun Tian, which apparently translates as passing springtime. And this is actually, I've been told, a smuggler's code for having successfully cleared customs checkpoints at the border. Though given the subject, as well as its geographical crossings, these kind of, criminal activities, everything, it's really clear that there's quite a lot of different kinds of crossings going on in the film, whether literal or metaphorical. So as we've mentioned, it did take quite a long time for the film to get made, and it took Bai Xue over a decade after graduating film school to get it made. She graduated from Beijing Film Academy in 2007. But a huge amount of work went into the film during this development period, and Bai Xue spent apparently 2 years in Shenzhen and Hong Kong doing research. And during this time, she interviewed a lot of cross-city students from different ages, interviewed their parents, talked to customs and other personnel. And apparently she compiled more than 20,000 words of notes as part of this. The film was backed by Wanda, one of the biggest studios in China. And she shot it with an experienced crew, though, interestingly, apparently around half of these comprised former classmates from her university days who had, gone on to work more in the industry. The film also notably had the famous Chinese film director Tian Zhangjuan as an executive producer, who's very much a key director of the fifth generation, and we'll talk a bit more about him later. And she also had a great editor in Matthew Leclau, whose work recently was seen with Jia Zhangke on Touch of Sin and onward. The film got very good reviews on its release. It premiered to a lot of acclaim in Toronto, and it also won a bunch of different awards. Like it got a NetPack Honorable Mention Award, and it was nominated for a Discovery Award. In China, it got awards at Pingyao, including Best Film and Best Actress. And it had its European premiere at the Berlin Film Festival in the Generation 14 Plus section, where she was also nominated for Best First Feature in the Crystal Bear. But yeah, it played a lot of other festivals around the world where it won awards and nominations like Dublin, the Asian Film Awards, Osaka. Unfortunately, it didn't do very well at the Chinese box office when it was released, though it did well in other countries. Particularly, it did well in Hong Kong, and it had some sold-out screenings at the Hong Kong International Film Festival. And it was also released, kind of like a mainstream release even, in a lot of countries around the world, including the US and the UK, which, seeing this kind of first-time director, semi-indie film getting mainstream release in the West was pretty rare, so that definitely marks the film as a success.
呢單嘢可唔可以做啊
？Baby， 花姐啊，
跟你以前打過未？
你的拿着。香港身份證住深圳嘅，單飛仔好方便嘅。
我真係叫你帶貨，你俾海關捉咗入去係咁摸，你驚唔驚？
用後腦啦，要坐監㗎。
But for me, when I saw The Crossing, the thing I really took from it was it's a very, very fresh feeling film. And it's a very, very impressive debut for Bai Xue, both as writer and director. It's a real mix of art house and commercial, and so it's kind of a thriller. There's definitely some genre in there, but it also deals with social issues. It's a character study, it's a coming of age drama. There's obviously crime elements in there, so there's a lot going on. And it does touch on social commentary and issues, as we've said, though. But at the same time, it's not a ponderous film at all. And, to be honest, like a lot of art house films can be, especially from first-time directors who can get like a little bit self-indulgent. And this is for Chinese directors or Western directors, but you never get that feeling from the film. At the same time, though, while you could definitely call it a genre-friendly film, it doesn't go for that kind of like a manipulative, like high-tension approach about whether or not Pepe is going to get caught. And the film never really hangs upon sort of building towards this kind of high premise conclusion where this is the only thing you're supposed to care about. And I think visually it's a very cool film as well, which is something we're going to talk to Bai Xue about. Like the way the film's visuals change when she's between Hong Kong and Shenzhen is very, very cool. You have like a shift in camera style from like handheld in Hong Kong to a lot of very slow cinema, like artistic still compositions in Shenzhen. And although it's not, you don't want to categorize the film just as, a female film in that respect, I do think it's the kind of film where having a male director would have been different. Even just it might have felt exploitative, or it would have been a lot more focused on putting Pepe in danger or putting her in situations of peril. But it feels really naturalistic across the board, not just in terms of Bai Xue's writing and direction, but also from the acting. And Huang Yao is fantastic in the film. And she really, she won a lot of awards for the film, which are all 100% deserved.
你睇，
係雪啊！
In the bleak midwinter,
我哋聖誕去喎，
made no
嗰幾日咧就一定會落雪。
earth stood hard as I
你挣那么多錢都幹嘛呢？
最後一次，
a stone.
唔好要我嘥時間。
But let's hear from Bai Xue herself, and let's get into discussing these different aspects of the film.
Hello, Silver Movie broadcast listeners. I'm Bai Xue.
Well, congratulations on The Crossing, which I have to say, I think it's one of the best Chinese films of the last couple of years, and it's definitely one of the most contemporary and the most modern feeling. So I think The Crossing feels different to other Chinese films, and it mixes an art house and commercial approach. And it kind of feels like there's some influences maybe from Western and international cinema as well. Were there any films and filmmakers in particular that influenced and inspired your techniques?
If I say that I have not been affected by anyone, it couldn't true. But I cannot name a specific film or filmmakers that have influenced me. I like Martin Scorsese very much. I like the balance between dramatic situations and the characters when they tell the story. I graduated from Department of Directing at Beijing Film Academy. For over 10 years after I graduated from my high school at 18 years old, I did not do any specific filming work. I worked as an intern in some film and TV drama groups, but those were just some one-off experience. What I feel important is that I have never stopped my thinking about film. When seeing a good film, I could think about how my first film would be in terms of its story and visual and audio style. This is related to my characters and personalities. I always want to do something different from others. A story structure needs soiled screenwriting techniques. However, how to shoot and how to be innovative in terms of techniques will reflect a director's aesthetic views. I want to make a new and fresh film, not heavy, but simple and powerful, which is what I aimed for and I did. I think that when one makes first feature film, they should forget the films that they have watched and follow his instinct. In this way, the finished work belongs to oneself.
Yeah, I'd agree with this. I mean, I think you can see some influences from other films and filmmakers, but there's no references, there's no obvious nods or homage. And I think it's definitely fair to say that The Crossing feels very much like her film. I think The Crossing really benefits from this though, and I think this is a part of why it feels so different to a lot of other Chinese indie films. And also, for first-time filmmakers, whether it's from China or, from anywhere in the world. There's definitely some international and European aspects to it, while it's still, very much rooted in Chinese culture and Chinese character. I think elsewhere, as well as Scorsese and Gonzalez, she's mentioned like the Three Colors trilogy as being something she's admired. But equally, I don't think this, or Scorsese or anything, is something you can see really specifically or obviously in The Crossing. And what this says to me is that Bai Xue seems to be a really confident director for a first-timer. And I think we can really see that she's trying to forge her own style. There's clearly a lot of thought has gone into all aspects of the film. And this is a big challenge and a big stressor. First-time filmmakers, to what point do you really push the boat out? Do you have that maturity to take that, to take that risk to make your own film versus, making your own film while at the same time kind of sticking to the things which have, inspired you when you were studying film? I mean, she spent a long time working on and prepping the film. We've mentioned that it took over 10 years to make, and we're going to discuss that with Bai Xue in a minute. But I think this comes across too as the film, it doesn't feel rushed. And I think this is part of its confidence. Again, a lot of first-time directors can naturally sort of fall back on trying to get things made quickly rather than taking their time. And again, maybe that's why they reflect directors they admire more. But you never get that sense here. The Crossing is never over-stylized. And it really does feel like she's trying to make her own film on her own terms, which is very interesting. And this is all the more impressive when you consider how ambitious The Crossing really is for a first-time film. Although on the one hand, it comes across, it's a pretty indie story. The actual fact of shooting in Hong Kong and the mainland was very, very challenging. Even just logistically, shifting between the two different areas. Not to mention that the fact of shooting around the border area itself was, it was very awkward and tricky to do. So everything about the film does feel, compared to other first-time directors in particular, it does feel a film like a lot of consideration has gone into it.
Bai Xue.
The film has a really interesting visual language, and the scenes in Hong Kong and Shenzhen look and feel very, very different. Could you maybe talk a little bit about the look and the visual effect you were trying to achieve?
In my story, the girl Pei studies and lives in two places. Although Shenzhen is very close to Hong Kong, their own temperament are very different. My cinema photographer, my art director, and I discussed this together. We hope to make something different. However, all this difference organized through of understanding of script as well as the characters. Pei most of the time in Hong Kong is with her friends, so she is very active. But when being back in Shenzhen, she needs to face her mother and has more stiff and unchangeable life. Therefore, we use handheld camera when filming in Hong Kong and mixed shoots in Shenzhen. The same with sound. We have actually made differences from the two places during sound mixing. Careful audience will get these fine differences when watch the film in cinema.
So I read in another interview that Bai Xue said that she really liked how American and European art house and indie filmmakers used visual language to actually really tell and progress their stories. And that's something you can definitely see with The Crossing. The cinematography was by Piao Song-ri, and I really like the look of the film. It's got a beautifully kind of ambient use of light all the way through it, which is fantastic. But talking about the two differences, which is probably the main thing people will talk about, Hong Kong and Shenzhen. Yeah, Hong Kong is seen as being like kind of claustrophobic. It's like handheld camera. Whereas Shenzhen everything is a lot quieter, it's a lot slower, and it seems to be shot a lot more using like fixed cameras. But yeah, I really like this aspect of the film, and I think it really makes The Crossing stand out. And yeah, to be fair, this is one of the things that most critics and reviewers seem to mention and pick up upon. And so it is clearly a very deliberate thing by Bai Xue, and another part of the film that a lot of thought has gone into. I do love the way the parts in Hong Kong feel very, very urgent. And this is the kind of thriller, I guess, genre parts of the film. And Shenzhen itself, it's almost surreal or kind of, not dreamlike, because it's still quite grounded, but the actual pace between the scenes in the two areas are completely different. But at the same time, talking about visual storytelling, Bai Xue does a great job of making this actually part of the film, part of the story. And Pei, her state of mind and her motivations and what's happening to her really tie into this visual language. The editing by Mathieu Leclerc was fantastic, and it really seems an occasion where, the director and the editor must have planned and worked very closely together. And this editing is definitely part of the visual language. The film has a lot of very fast cutting in places. It's almost kind of like verite or new wave style, which you can see in Leclerc's work with Jia Zhangke. And I think this makes the film feel even more urgent in places. And though the Shenzhen scenes have a very different pace, you can still see, it's the same consistent approach to editing and pacing across the film. I should also mention that this is really reflected in the soundtrack too. And it's a very cool soundtrack for the film. I really like it. You've probably heard some bits here from the trailer clips we've been playing. There's some really, really cool fast electro and techno music for some parts. And on the other hand, some slow, almost classical pieces. And, again, though, they fit together as a whole. And I think that's really the most important thing about the film in this respect, is that Bai Xue manages to marry all these different elements together. I know the film, as with its title, it crosses a lot of different geographical, metaphorical, literal borders as these different sides. It all fits together very, very smoothly and is a very consistent and coherent whole.
又靚又醒目，而家靚妹邊有咁醒啊？
The crossing deals with the relationship and differences between China and Hong Kong in a very, very interesting way. And I read that you grew up in Shenzhen yourself. What was it like shooting between China and Hong Kong? And how did you make sure that things felt and looked authentic for the characters and their situations?
Yes, indeed. I grew up in Shenzhen, so I'm familiar with Hong Kong pop culture. However, when you try to get close to the daily life of Hong Kong people, you will still feel strange. So I try my best to approach their life. I went to Hong Kong Historical Museum and I checked with local people of different age, different career. This can be seen as an interview and on-the-spot interrogation. I worked as well as observed. The more I got into it, the less I knew. For a spirit, I'm afraid that I could not be able to handle it well, and I was afraid that I could not make the film feel authentic. But I become relieved after I thought about that. Human nature is universal. If we leave aside social structures, that's why people can reach mutual understanding via an artistic work. Because human emotion and human nature are interlinked. When you get this, it will help you to understand the characters in films. With regards to detail, I think having a few authentic scenes will help to build the film better.
Yeah, I think a key thing about The Crossing is that you can really see how much work went into the film and into making it feel authentic. And we've mentioned before, all the research that Bai Xue did. Yeah, and as a result, the characters and their situations, they do all feel believable. And some specific scenes and small details really do help. As we've said, the film has the two very different parts in Hong Kong and Shenzhen. And so maybe from this, you can say that the Hong Kong parts have kind of an outsider perspective. Familiar maybe, but not necessarily local. Though this works really well for the film, and along with these different visual techniques we've discussed, these details do give the film its different geographical locations. And the locations have character as well, as well as their themes. I think as well, though, it really feels as if Bai Xue is connecting with and trying to sympathize with her characters. And this is probably, again, as a result of the fact that she did so much work. So as well as all these geographic details, there's a lot of what I feel are like real-life anecdotes. And while the film it's not particularly melodramatic, a lot of the tension comes from the fact that it feels like she genuinely cares about her characters and their real-world equivalents. It is a youth film, and this is crucial though as well. And I think if it had been made maybe by a director who was more removed from the subject, who didn't do this research, who didn't have Bai Xue's background, I think with the characters, they wouldn't be as believable. and the film wouldn't have the same impact that it does. I gotta say though that I think the actress Huang Yao is also a big reason for the film's success in this area. So apparently she was born and raised in Foshan, which is near Shenzhen, but by a family of northern Chinese. She can speak both Cantonese and Mandarin. And she's fantastic in the film. And like Bai Xue's direction, there's kind of like a quiet confidence to her acting. You know, nothing showy. It feels kind of different to a lot of young actresses, first-time actresses might be. It's a very naturalistic performance that Bai Xue gets from her. And she uses her eyes a lot, even when she's not talking. Since I guess you can say that her crossing into adulthood is maybe ultimately what the film is about, and maybe with, you know, Hong Kong and Shenzhen kind of representing different sides to her character and choices. She has to carry the whole film on her shoulders, and she does it incredibly well. She won the Best Actress Award at Hong Kong International Film Festival, again at Pingyao, and Best Newcomer at Beijing Student Film Festival, as well as some other awards, all 100% deserved, and she is definitely one of the film's key strengths.
真係 OK？
你挣那么多钱都干嘛了呀？
那你挣那么多钱都干嘛呀？
人未用可憐。
So The Crossing has screened and won awards at many festivals around the world. And it's been released internationally in a lot of countries to a lot of acclaim. Although the film has a very specific setting and quite personal feel, do you think that it has a universal message that speaks to global audiences?
Film can be either simple or complex, and it is same with the characters. Although you are writing about a girl's story, the time she lives in has its special side. What interests me most is the psychological change when an individual study across the border. What the audience feels should be left to the audience. My starting point is simple: to write a good story for this girl and make a contemporary story.
Yeah, I think this is important, and it's a great point. I think if you make a film like a really successful character study, then it should be universal, no matter where it comes from. As we've said, there's a lot of details, all her research, and there are cultural specifics, plus, of course, the language. But I think The Crossing is a film which people from anywhere can understand and follow, especially younger audiences. As we've said, there's social commentary in the film as well as its thriller elements, but I think calling it a character study is probably the fairest way to describe it. And I've seen another quote from Bai Xue as well. "I'm not trying to reflect anything about society. I find that rather silly. That is not something a movie should do. Social issues affect the characters, so inevitably people will discuss these issues, but that's not my starting point." And yeah, that's something I can definitely see in The Crossing. You take the character as a starting point. You write a story for her, rather than going the other way around and starting with your issues and themes and writing characters to fit them. And that's definitely not what Bai Xue has done here. And this ties again to the film being almost a mix of genres, and Bai Xue trying very hard to have her own visual language, her own film language. So it's got Chinese characteristics, but this is kind of a cinephile film in many ways. And being a cinephile, being a film fan, is definitely universal. You could take the story for The Crossing, and you could probably set it anywhere in the world with the character like Pepe. You would adjust some cultural specifics, but she'd still be Pepe, and she'd still have the same journey.
有男朋友啊？
我冇啊，你同你阿媽一樣真雞嚟㗎。
别人女儿有什么，你必须要有。
都给我滚！
The film has the veteran filmmaker Tian Zhuangzhang as executive producer. How did this come about, and what was his involvement with the film?
Director Tian Zhuangzhang is a teacher that I knew from my university. I had not written any long story until I started working on this film. So I wanted to show it to my teacher, Tian. He encouraged me and to fully committed to it. And that is how he became my executive producer. He has got involved into the screenwriting and editing, but he always told me that this is my kid. He means this film is my kid, and you need to learn to make decisions. I did not quite get it at the beginning, but later I understood that he was actually pushing me to grow out of it. What he influenced me most is my views on films, and he's the person who infected my film view. During the whole filming, he didn't take part in any opinions. He's the important guy in my life.
Oh, so that's really interesting to hear. I mean, Tian is he's such an influential figure in the Chinese industry. Now, for anyone who's not familiar with him, he's one of the key figures of the fifth generation of filmmakers in China. And this also included Zhang Yimou and Chen Kaige. During his career, he's worked on avant-garde films, documentary, as well as more commercial films. And some key works would be The Horse Thief, Blue Kite, Springtime in a Small Town, The Go Master, and Warrior and the Wolf, and all definitely worth checking out. But from what I've read about The Crossing, he was more on the development side, and he kind of stepped back. And I really like the quote, saying him calling the film her kid, and you can definitely see that it's very much her film, as we've said throughout. This kind of mentoring can be really, really useful for young filmmakers, and I think it's great when it comes from somebody like Tian. It doesn't sound at all like he was trying to push her, and The Crossing certainly looks and feels, very, very different to anything he's ever done. He has actually done mentoring with other directors as well, like Ning Hao, director of Crazy Stone, and more recently Crazy Alien, who we're definitely going to be covering Ning Hao in another episode. And I think the success of directors like Bai Xue and Ning Hao shows how important this kind of mentoring can be. And I think it's a very good part of any industry which is trying to look towards developing young talent. Working as a female director in China, where the industry is often seen as being very male-dominated, were there any extra challenges you faced? And do you see this as a side of the industry which is changing?
This situation does not only existing in China. I think most country film industry dominated by male. However, interestingly, many stories that come to me recently are all about females. Many Chinese senior managers are mature and charming ladies. People seem to pay close attention to female topics and tell their story through films. I believe female filmmakers have their own advantage to making film. In my personal experience, I haven't come close to unjustified case yet, so I don't have special opinions on gender problem. If I have any, it may happen to my writing about male characters.
Yeah, I definitely agree with this. This is not a situation unique to China. It's definitely true in the UK, and around the world, the film industry is historically and still very much male dominated. There do seem to be more female stories and films coming through, and as I've mentioned, this is something we're trying to do a lot of episodes about in the Silk Road Movie podcast. And I think we are seeing young female filmmakers coming through a lot, as well as female stories in general, whether that's by male or female filmmakers. So I think hopefully this means that things are changing, and hopefully filmmakers like Bai Xue will go on to have long, successful careers. And then, become senior industry figures themselves. And this will then help open more doors and inspire future female filmmakers. I am definitely seeing more young Chinese female filmmakers coming forward with first-time works, quite often which are really cool, like art house and indie films too as well. So it's something which is very exciting to see. I mean, it's a slow process, but hopefully this is something like a trend which is coming along. But at the same time, it's really important not just to label, as female filmmakers and female films, and just to recognize, as being great films and filmmakers in their own in their own right. Bai Xue is very clearly a talented filmmaker, and The Crossing is a great film, whether it was made by a female director or not. And it's not a film which should ever be characterized as pitched only for a female audience, which is definitely not the case. As Bai Xue says, it's not so much for her about making films specifically about gender problems or issues. And it's about the story she wants to tell and the character she wants to write.
我希望香港落雪。
你好中意睇雪啊？我淨係信我自己嘅咋。
As a new first-time director, how was the film developed and how much of a challenge was it to raise financing?
In China, there is a China Film Directors Guild. It has a Young Director Support Program called CFDG Young Director Support Program. My script was selected by this program, and that is how I found my investment for this film. Also, it has thanks to the production companies who were brave enough to invest in the new directors, something which does need brightness and vision. There is no denying that young director needs to seize the opportunity and do not film them away, to get them interested in you. With regard to how to make new attempts, big companies were willing to try. In fact, I was lucky, so I got this program in Wanda to support me.
Yeah, it's never an easy time getting funding, speaking as a producer myself. And it's always really interesting to hear about these kinds of support programs. And I think she's definitely right. Yeah, whether it's China, the UK, or anywhere in the world, it's really important for young and first-time directors to know what they're doing and to make sure they make the most of any of these kind of opportunities. As we've said many times during this episode with The Crossing, you can really see how much work went into the film. And I think this is one of the things which really makes a huge difference, both for the film and for Bai Xue, probably in her her continuing career. At the same time, it's also fantastic to see a really big company like Wanda getting involved. And as Bai Xue says, it's a really bold move from a company like this to support young directors who are not tested commercially yet. And for any country's film industry, it's really important to nurture young talent and to make sure these kind of refreshing and new adventurous films get made. And I think this is something we are seeing more of in China, maybe slowly, but we're seeing a lot of young directors getting support to making these kind of, this kind of boundary pushing spirit with art house and indie leanings. And I think as well as resulting in films like The Crossing, this is hopefully going to lay the groundwork for the future. And young directors of the next generation will be inspired by filmmakers like Bai Xue. So after the international success of The Crossing, what are you working on next?
My next story is about crime involving ivory trading, which is not easy for me at all. I have spent over 1 year researching and selecting materials, but it is going to be made into script soon. Meanwhile, I have a family comedy at initial discussion stage.
Sounds very interesting. And I can't think of any other films from China which have tackled this kind of, elephant, ivory trading. It's obviously a very topical subject, dealing with concerns about animals and the environment. And it sounds like, as with The Crossing, that it's going to have maybe some genre elements, some crime elements, which should be very cool as well. Hopefully, it won't take another 10 years to get this film made, though I'm certain she's going to be putting in like another huge amount of research work, and we'll see the same levels of like detail and authenticity in there. But hopefully, you know, after the international acclaim of The Crossing, she shouldn't hopefully have too much trouble getting financing. And I'll say again, yeah, Bai Xue is clearly a very fresh and important new voice in Chinese cinema, and I really like this mix of art house and commercial, and it's very exciting to see whatever she does next.
Thank you.
Yeah, and a very big thanks to Bai Xue as well. Thank you very much for joining us for this episode of the Silk Road Movie Podcast, and I'm sure everyone listening has really enjoyed the chat as well. So I definitely recommend that you try and check out The Crossing as soon as you can. And please stay tuned to future episodes of the Silk Road Movie Podcast, when we're going to be covering other Chinese female filmmakers. So that's about it for this episode of the Silk Road Movie Podcast, and thanks for listening. And a very big thanks again to Bai Xue for joining us. So please do subscribe to the podcast, follow us on social media, and we'll keep you up to date in the very best in Chinese cinema. I'm James, and I hope you've enjoyed your journey along the cinematic Silk Road to China.